Greetings. Today we delve into a story from the turbulent skies over the Solomon Islands in 1943, a story that unravels the shocking truth behind Japan's supposed aerial invincibility. What if the aircraft the Japanese believed unbeatable was actually a technological marvel that could change everything? Could a single note from a hidden flight log reveal the secret that would shake the very foundation of Japanese naval aviation? Imagine a Japanese pilot recording in his log words so dangerous that, if discovered, they might have led to death or worse. What if this note exposed that the new American fighter, the F4U Corsair, was no ordinary aircraft but a game-changer, more advanced than anyone could have imagined? How did this aircraft, arriving in force during the so-called Valentine's Day Massacre, threaten to turn the tide of the Pacific War? Did it mark the beginning of the end for Japan's myth of invincibility, built on the legendary Mitsubishi Zero? And what about the confidence of Japan's elite naval pilots, like Hiroyoshi Nishiwa, who believed their fighters were divine extensions of the samurai spirit? Could a single encounter with the Corsair shatter their illusions, exposing a brutal truth that victory depended not just on skill or courage, but on horsepower, armor, and industrial might? As the landscape of aerial combat rapidly evolved, would Japan's hope for dominance prove to be a dangerous illusion? All of this points to one critical question. How did the arrival of the F4U Corsair, with its unmatched speed and armor, fundamentally undermine Japan's confidence and reshape the future of naval aviation? In this video, we will trace that truth from secret notes to battlefield realities, separating myth from reality and revealing the shocking transformation that changed the course of history. The most astonishing revelations are just ahead. So stay tuned, because what you're about to learn will forever alter your view of the Pacific War. The real story begins now. On February 14th, in the year 1943, amidst the turbulent skies over the Solomon Islands, a Japanese naval aviator meticulously recorded notes in his flight log, words so significant that, had they been discovered by his superiors at the base in Rabaul, they would likely have led to severe punishment or worse. These notes revealed an unsettling truth about the new American fighter aircraft that had recently appeared in the theater of war. Contrary to the assurances and optimistic reports issued by Allied commanders, this aircraft was far from being inferior. It was, in fact, a technological marvel that defied current understanding and expectations. Its true capabilities stretched well beyond the limits of what Japan's military doctrines had anticipated. It was an aircraft so advanced that it seemed almost beyond comprehension at the time. This revelation came in the aftermath of a fierce confrontation over Guadalcanal, where Japanese pilots encountered the F4U Corsair for the very first time in combat. The Corsair, which Americans would later romanticize as one of their most iconic fighters of the war, had arrived with a force and a presence that would drastically alter the course of aerial battles in the Pacific region. During what is now often remembered as the Valentine's Day Massacre, a squadron of 12 Corsairs from Marine Fighting Squadron 124 engaged Japanese forces. The results of this engagement were mixed, with notable losses on both sides. 2 Corsairs, along with several other Allied aircraft, were lost in the skirmish, a heavy price to pay. Nonetheless, the Japanese had suffered significant losses as well. Despite this tactical setback for the Allies, the event marked the beginning of a new era in aerial combat. The arrival of the F4U Corsair was not merely a change in aircraft, it became a catalyst for a profound shift in the fundamental principles of naval aviation. The Corsair's performance and technological superiority began to challenge deeply ingrained Japanese beliefs about aerial warfare. Beliefs that had depended heavily on the myth of invincibility of their fighters and the supremacy of their technical innovations, particularly the Mitsubishi A6M0. Although the Zero's early dominance seemed unassailable, what the Japanese pilots failed to realize was that they had just witnessed the first act of a transformation. This transformation would erode the confidence of Japan's most elite naval aviators, men who once believed their aircraft and their skills were unbeatable, capable of conquering every corner of the Pacific from Pearl Harbor to Singapore. The truth was, the rapidly changing landscape of aerial combat was beginning to be rewritten. It wasn't a matter of raw pilot skill or unshakable warrior spirit alone. Instead, it was being redefined by factors such as horsepower, armor thickness, and industrial capacity. These elements, rather than pure combat prowess, would determine victory or defeat. Soon enough, the Japanese would learn that their earlier assumptions about technological and tactical superiority had been fundamentally flawed. Their hope that their fighters would dominate indefinitely was a dangerous miscalculation, one that would have catastrophic consequences at the strategic level. To grasp the full extent of the psychological and tactical blow the Corsair inflicted upon Japanese naval aviation, it is essential to understand the prevailing mindset in early 1943. During this period, Japan's Imperial Navy enjoyed a sense of invincibility that seemed to be rooted in the overwhelming success of their initial strikes and victories. For nearly 2 years, their Zero fighters soared across the skies of the Pacific with near impunity, destroying their enemies with devastating efficiency. The statistics appeared to confirm their superiority, fueling arrogance and confidence. At Pearl Harbor, out of the 9 Zeros that participated in the attack, only a handful were lost in the process of kamikazing hundreds of American aircraft. In the Philippines, in what was considered one of the most decisive early battles, 9 Zeros claimed the destruction of over 550 Allied aircraft during the first week alone, all while losing fewer than 40 of their own. This ratio of kills to losses, often exceeding 10-1, was widely regarded as evidence of divine favor, or perhaps the inherent superiority of the Japanese Aviation Corps. Further reinforcing this belief was the testimony of comrades like Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishiwa, who had become Japan's leading ace by early 1943 with a staggering 87 confirmed aerial victories. In a letter to his younger brother, Nishiwa lauded the Zero as the perfect weapon, an aircraft so perfectly attuned to the spirit of its pilot that it was akin to a samurai wielding his sword. He dismissed American aircraft as nothing more than flying trucks, heavy, cumbersome, and lacking the soul that Nishiwa claimed was the source of the Zero's battlefield dominance. For Nishiwa and many of his fellow pilots, the Zero was not just a machine, it was a symbol of harmonious unity between man and machine, an extension of the samurai code of honor and prowess. This belief was not mere propaganda, but was rooted in concrete performance statistics from the period of 1941 and 1942. During those years, the Mitsubishi A6M0, often simply called Zero, was renowned for its remarkable agility and speed, especially when compared to its contemporary American fighters. It was lighter and more aerodynamically efficient, with a weight-to-power ratio that allowed it to outperform many of its adversaries. Specifically, the Zero's engine produced roughly half the horsepower of the F4F Wildcat, yet its design enabled it to ascend rapidly, climbing to 2,500 meters, or approximately 8,200 feet, in just 5 minutes and 30 seconds. This climb rate was notably faster by an entire minute than that of the American planes it faced, giving Japanese pilots an early advantage in aerial combat situations. Lieutenant Koname Harada, a veteran of the Pearl Harbor attack and an ace with a total of 19 confirmed air victories, reflected on these early days of air combat during a 1976 interview. He recalled a feeling of invincibility while flying the Zero, describing it as an aircraft that responded almost instinctively to a pilot's thoughts rather than mere control inputs. This intuitive handling allowed Japanese pilots to perform elegant, dance-like maneuvers in the air, creating a formidable spectacle. Meanwhile, American pilots, though courageous and equally brave, often operated aircraft that, compared to the Zero, felt sluggish and less responsive. They seemed to lumber through the sky rather than dance gracefully. Despite their obvious bravery, the American pilots faced an aircraft that, at least in the early years of the war, seemed almost unbeatable in terms of maneuverability and responsiveness. The Zero's agility and lightweight gave it an edge that, at the time, seemed insurmountable. However, by late 1942, indications of vulnerability began to surface, even as the Japanese Naval Command publicly refused to accept that their aircraft might have limitations. The Battle of Midway marked a turning point, with the Japanese losing not only 4 aircraft carriers, but also a significant number of their most experienced naval aviators, probably no fewer than 110 men. Many of these veteran pilots had accumulated over 1,000 flying hours and fought in China before the Midway conflict, making them invaluable and irreplaceable assets to Japan's aerial strength. The loss of these seasoned pilots was a blow that was difficult to recover from rapidly. More concerning, however, were the emerging technical reports from the front lines that painted a sobering picture. Commander Minoru Gender, a tactical strategist involved in the planning of the Pearl Harbor attack and later instrumental in establishing Japan's post-war air self-defense force, authored a classified report mentioning that American fighters were becoming increasingly difficult to shoot down. The new generation of U.S. fighters, notably the F-6F Hellcat, was demonstrating exceptional resilience. Even when subjected to intense fire, these aircraft seemed to absorb damage and continue fighting. Pilots reported futile efforts trying to bring down Hellcats with dozens of 7.7mm rounds, often without success, a testament to their durability. The Guadalcanal campaign further revealed the stark reality of the shifting balance of power. The Japanese were experiencing difficulties in maintaining their numerical dominance, which had once leveled the playing field or even granted them superiority. By early 1943, American forces routinely encountered large formations of their fighters, sometimes 20, 30, or even 50 aircraft at a time. This overwhelming numerical superiority made it impossible for the Japanese pilots, operating under Bushido's traditional code emphasizing skill and honor, to rely solely on their tactics. Instead, they had to contend with the brutal arithmetic of industrial production and technological advancement. The first confirmed combat between Japanese Zeros and the new American F4U Corsair occurred on February 14, 1943. A small squadron of 12 F4U Corsairs from Marine Fighting Squadron 124, which had arrived at Guadalcanal just 2 days earlier, was escorting PB-4Y Liberators on a bombing run when they encountered Japanese fighters. The engagement produced losses on both sides. 2 Corsairs, 4 P-40 fighters, 4 P-38 Lightning fighters, and 2 Liberators were lost, while the Japanese lost 3 Zeros and additional bombers. Although the fight did not produce a decisive tactical victory for either side, it marked the beginning of the Corsairs' dominance in the Pacific skies. The technical superiority of the F4U Corsair stunned Japanese analysts. The Corsair's engine, a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, generated around 2,000 horsepower, more than double that of the Zero's Nakajima Sakai 12 engine, which produced just under 1,000 horsepower, or the later A6M5's Sakai 21, producing approximately 1,130 horsepower. This immense power translated into extraordinary performance metrics. The Corsair could reach a top speed of a little over 417 miles per hour, considerably faster than the Zero's maximum of around 331 miles per hour, and even outpacing the P-40's figure of about 351 miles per hour. It could climb during the early stages of the conflict over the Pacific. Fierce aerial engagements unfolded, with Japanese aircraft, including a significant number of approximately 110 that challenged Allied positions. Among these encounters took place near Guadalcanal, where fighters from the Allied forces, numbering around 76 aircraft, faced off against the Japanese, which included Corsair fighters flown by seasoned Marine squadrons. The clash had devastating consequences for the Japanese, resulting in the loss of 39 aircraft from their side, compared to only 12 Allied fighters destroyed, a stark indicator of the shifting balance of power in aerial combat at that time. One notable participant in these early operations was Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, a daring Marine aviator who would later rise to command the renowned VMF 214, famously known as the Black Sheep Squadron. Over the course of his illustrious career, Boyington amassed an impressive tally of 28 aerial victories. In his autobiography, titled Bar Black Sheep, he vividly described the advent of new tactics that would revolutionize aerial combat for the Allies. These tactics emphasize speed, altitude, and aggressive engagement, marking a significant shift from traditional dogfighting principles. The Mitsubishi Zero, Japan's most iconic fighter, had earned a reputation among pilots for being an exceptionally nimble aircraft. It was considered a dream to operate if a pilot maintained a leisurely speed, staying slow and graceful in the air. However, the Zero's real strength lay in its ability to attack from high altitude and swift velocity. The tactics employed by Allied pilots entailed high-speed dives from altitude, firing their weaponry during these rapid passes, then using the energy gained from the descent to climb away quickly, a maneuver later known as the boom and zoom tactic. This approach undermined the Zero's greatest advantage, its exceptional maneuverability at lower speeds, enabling Allied fighters to strike and withdraw with relative safety before the Japanese fighters could counterattack effectively. In May of 1943, Japanese technical teams conducted an examination of captured Allied aircraft, analyzing field reports with growing concern. Their findings were alarming. The construction quality of the Corsair was far beyond anything Japan could emulate with its existing industrial capacity. The Corsair's armor plating, which weighed in at approximately 155 pounds, provided extensive protection for the pilot, the aircraft's oil tank, and its oil cooler. Remarkably, this armor exceeded the weight of many entire Japanese trainer aircraft. Its bulletproof windscreen, a solid 38 millimeters thick, was capable of stopping rounds from 7.7 millimeter machine guns at extremely close range, a formidable defense that rendered many attacks ineffective. Moreover, the Corsair's self-sealing fuel tanks contained multiple layers of rubber that expanded upon puncture, significantly reducing the risk of catastrophic fires, a common cause of death for Zero pilots in combat. The aircraft's most formidable feature, however, was its armament. The Corsair was equipped with 6 Browning 25 millimeter caliber machine guns, contrasting sharply with the Zero's lighter armament of 7.7 millimeter machine guns. Each of the Corsair's guns fired rounds with 8 times the kinetic energy of the Japanese aircraft's weaponry. With a total ammunition load of approximately 2,350 rounds, the Corsair could deliver a sustained 30 seconds of continuous fire, 3 times more than the Zero. The aircraft's ammunition included high-impact armor-piercing incendiary rounds, designated ANM-2, capable of penetrating up to 21 millimeters of armor at 500 yards, a feat the Zero could not match, given its negligible armor protection. By June of 1943, American intelligence reports conveyed the grim reality facing Japan's naval aviation efforts. These reports detailed the incredible pace and scale of American aircraft production, with the United States set to produce over 12,171 Corsairs by the conclusion of the war. These production figures included over 4,952 F4U1A and F4U1U1 variants, alongside newer models introduced later. The Goodyear Company manufactured close to 4,391 FG models, while Brewster built approximately 735 F3A variants. Comparatively, Japan's total military aircraft production for fighter models was significantly less. Throughout the entire conflict, Mitsubishi assembled 3,879 Zero fighters, and Nakajima produced 6,570. However, raw production figures only painted part of the picture. The American aircraft industry was characterized by relentless innovation and continuous refinement. The F4U1A variant, for example, introduced a raised cockpit to improve pilot visibility in combat. The F4U1C was armed with 4 20mm cannons, boosting firepower. The F4U1D could carry 4,000 pounds of ordnance, vastly increasing its versatility in ground attack roles. By late 1944, the F4U4, powered by a 2,450 horsepower engine, could reach a top speed approaching 446. The training program in question was truly extraordinary in its rigor and intensity, designed meticulously to produce elite pilots capable of facing the brutal demands of aerial combat. It was so demanding that it boasted a staggering 95% dropout rate, meaning the vast majority of aspiring pilots simply could not withstand the rigorous curriculum, and fewer than 5% of those who started actually graduated as fully trained and combat-ready aviators. As a result, this system was highly selective, capable of turning out only around 100 pilots each year, a relatively modest number given the scale of ongoing conflicts and the urgent need for seasoned fighters. In stark contrast to this highly selective and painstaking process, The United States Navy had developed a vastly larger and more efficient training program. By the year 1943, their routine was to produce approximately 25,500 pilots every month, an output that kept pace with the enormous scale of operations and the relentless demands of the war effort. This enormous volume of trained pilots meant that replacement pilots could be supplied rapidly and extensively, ensuring the Navy maintained a robust and continuously replenished aerial force. Prior to their deployment into combat zones, these American pilots received an intensive and comprehensive flight training regimen totaling around 600 hours. This training was meticulous and covered all aspects necessary for combat effectiveness, including approximately 200 hours specifically dedicated to advanced fighter aircraft, equipping these pilots with specialized skills in handling high-performance fighters under combat conditions. In comparison, the Japanese replacement pilots of 1943 had far less exposure, generally accumulating between 100 and 150 hours of total flight time throughout their training, a figure that reflected a much less comprehensive preparation. By the year 1945, the situation had become even more dire for Japanese pilots, particularly those tasked with kamikaze missions. Some of these pilots had flown so little that their total flying hours could have dwindled as low as 40, an extremely minimal amount of flight experience considering the complexity and danger of combat aviation. Mathematically and strategically, the implications of these differences in training were profound and inexorable. Every experienced pilot lost in combat was not merely an immediate tragedy, but also a source of ongoing difficulty, because replacement pilots had significantly less training, often only 1/6 of what the original pilot had completed. This meant that each loss of a seasoned Corsair pilot, for example, was effectively a reduction in aerial capability, as it was replaced by someone with drastically reduced skills and battlefield readiness. Conversely, when a single Corsair aircraft was shot down, it was usually replaced by a pilot with equal or even superior training, thanks to the extensive focus on pilot quality in American programs. As the war progressed, the gap in quality between opposing forces widened with each engagement. Japan's strategic stronghold of Rabaul, a fortress in the South Pacific and a stubborn bastion of Japanese naval aviation, became increasingly vulnerable and ultimately earned the grim reputation of becoming a graveyard for Japanese airmen and their aircraft. Between October of 1943 and February of 1944, continuous combat between Japanese air squadrons and American fighters equipped with Corsairs led to catastrophic losses for Japan, effectively decimating their remaining pool of experienced and battle-hardened pilots. Statistics from this period tell a harrowing story of systematic annihilation. For instance, on the 11th of November, 1943, American carrier air groups, including Corsairs, launched strikes into Rabaul's harbor and airfields. Out of a total of 270 Japanese aircraft available, 35 were destroyed outright, while 40 more were damaged beyond immediate repair. By the 17th of December, 1943, during another major attack involving a fleet of 31 Marine Corsairs, 22 Navy Hellcats, and 23 WWII aircraft, Japanese forces found themselves incapable of mounting significant resistance. The handful of interceptors that did take to the skies were swiftly shot down, their effectiveness drastically diminished, reflecting the ever-growing technological and training advantages of the American forces. By January of 1944, Japanese pilots had become hesitant to engage American Corsairs unless they held overwhelming numerical superiority, a stark reversal from the early days of the war when individual Zeros would daringly attack entire enemy squadrons. This change in tactics underscored the shift in aerial power, the result of relentless Allied air assaults, superior aircraft, and advanced training programs that left Japanese pilots at a disadvantage that was difficult to overcome. Although the influential F4U Corsair did not take part in the decisive Battle of the Philippine Sea on June 19, 1944, carrier operations and aerial engagements during this period remained predominantly in the hands of the F-6F Hellcat fighters. The outcomes of these encounters demonstrated a complete and spectacular reversal of aerial supremacy that the Japanese once held. The American fighters, armed with superior technology, tactics, and training, inflicted devastating losses on Japanese aircraft. Exactly 445 Japanese planes were destroyed, in contrast to a mere 30 American aircraft lost, an almost surreal reversal of earlier ratios. The kill ratio that once favored Japan 10-1 in 1941 was, in the early days of aerial combat, Japan found itself severely limited, both in terms of its pilot training and the quality of its aircraft, facing a stark reality. Neither the skill nor the technological advantage was sufficient to mount an effective escape or counterattack. For much of the war, Japanese fighters and pilots were a formidable force. However, as the conflict progressed, the disadvantages became increasingly evident. The introduction of the F4U Corsair in October of the year 1844 marked a pivotal turning point, fundamentally altering the balance of aerial warfare. This aircraft was powered by a revolutionary engine delivering 2,450 horsepower, which could be boosted to a remarkable 1,760 horsepower with the addition of water injection. Its top speed soared to a breathtaking 446 miles per hour, numbers that obliterated any lingering illusions about Japanese aircraft supremacy. This new Corsair variant had capabilities that allowed it to outperform the famous Zero fighter in every conceivable flight regime, be it speed, altitude, climb rate, or maneuverability, shattering the illusion of invincibility that the Zero once enjoyed. This technological leap forced the Japanese military into a grim introspective shift. The advance of superior aircraft and the declining standards of pilot training created a profound psychological transformation among Japanese airmen. The era of elite fighter pilots, confident in their craft, was now giving way to a desperate reality. Many pilots were tasked with what could only be described as suicidal missions. This tragic transition symbolized Japan's ultimate capitulation in the war effort, an acknowledgement that conventional tactics would be futile against the advancing Allied forces. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, a key figure responsible for organizing Japan's kamikaze units in October of 1844, articulated this cold, brutal calculus during a staff meeting. He reflected that if Japan continued with traditional, dogfight-style attacks, they risked losing every aircraft, fully 100% of their fleet, while the enemy's losses would be negligible. Conversely, if they resorted to specially designed destructive attacks, what would later be known as kamikaze missions, they would still lose all their aircraft, but with a potential to inflict significant damage on the Allied vessels and ships. This stark choice encapsulated the tragic logic that drove Japan's desperate strategy. The first organized kamikaze attack took place on October 25, 1844, during the Battle of the Leyte Gulf, a pivotal naval engagement in the Pacific Theater. In this assault, 50 Zero fighters, each armed with a 250-kilogram bomb, targeted American escort carriers. As the war escalated, pilots from the Marine Corps Corsair squadrons found themselves confronting a radical shift in combat dynamics. Instead of engaging in traditional dogfights, they now had to intercept pilots deliberately sacrificing their lives to inflict damage. This marked a complete reversal from the classic aerial confrontations of earlier years. Lieutenant Yukio Seki, who led Japan's first official kamikaze mission, left behind a grim testament in his final writings. Before his death, he expressed the somber realization that Japan's future looked bleak if it continued to sacrifice its best pilots. He asserted, "Japan's future is bleak if it is forced to kill one of its best pilots," and added poignantly, "I am not going on this mission for the Emperor or for the Empire. I am going because I was ordered to." His words underscored the tragic loss of individual agency among pilots turned into pawns of a doomed strategy. By the year 1845, a comprehensive analysis of wartime documents and post-war evaluations revealed the depths of Japan's technological and strategic deficiencies. The stark differences between the aircraft of the two sides had become undeniable. For instance, in the year 1845, the F4U Corsair boasted a maximum speed of 446 miles per hour, while the Japanese A6M50 model 521 from 1943 managed only about 351 miles per hour. The Corsair could reach a service ceiling of 41,500 feet, in contrast to the Japanese fighter's 36,250 feet. Moreover, the Corsair's rate of climb was 3,870 feet per minute, well above the Japanese counterparts' 2,125 feet per minute. The power plants exemplified the technological disparity. The Corsair's engine produced a staggering 2,760 horsepower, dwarfing the 1,130 horsepower of the Japanese engine. Its empty weight was 9,250 pounds, considerably heavier than the 4,136 pounds of the Japanese plane, yet it carried a significantly heavier armament load, around 6.7 pounds of firepower per second, compared to just over 2 pounds for the Japanese aircraft. The Corsair also had armor protection valued at 155, while Japan's fighters lacked any armor. In terms of survivability, the Corsair's fuel tanks were equipped with self-sealing features, whereas Japanese. The evolution of aerial combat tactics and aircraft designs during the latter stages of the Pacific War reveals a profound shift driven by the stark realities of technological superiority and strategic necessity. Prior to their final missions, Japanese pilots faced the formidable challenge of confronting American aviation, primarily armed with aircraft that had significantly surpassed their own in terms of firepower, durability, and overall combat effectiveness. The dominance of the WWII F4U Corsair, with its advanced engineering and combat record, compelled Japanese military strategists to implement dramatic changes in their tactical doctrines. By the year of 1944, the Japanese military command had established strict standing orders that effectively barred engagement with the Corsair unless the opponent's forces enjoyed at least a 3-to-1 numerical advantage. Even under such exceptional circumstances, pilots were advised to execute just a single attack run before disengaging if the tactic proved unsuccessful, an acknowledgement of the aircraft's formidable capabilities. Instructions disseminated to Japanese pilots in late 1944 explicitly recognized their aircraft's profound inferiority in both firepower and survivability. These directives left little room for aggressive tactics, such as climbing to overtake the Corsair or attempting to outrun it through diving maneuvers. Instead, they emphasized avoiding direct confrontation altogether. Moreover, Japanese pilots were warned against head-on approaches, given the Corsair's superior armament, which made such attacks exceedingly risky. Instead, they were advised to approach only when they held an overwhelming advantage, such as superior numbers or surprise, and to attack swiftly. The tactical manual explicitly urged pilots never to fly straight in level for more than 20 seconds at a time, as such exposure would make them vulnerable to the Corsair's heavy weapons. If caught in a bounce, meaning the enemy had outmaneuvered and attacked from a position of advantage, the recommended response was to rapidly execute a split-S maneuver, a sharp descending turn, and attempt to break away at the lowest possible altitude. This difficult and dangerous evasive tactic accentuated the desperate circumstances faced by Japanese aviators. As the war progressed into early 1945, the situation deteriorated into what could only be described as catastrophic. Japanese pilots flew aircraft that, by that point, had not undergone proper maintenance for months, further undermining their combat effectiveness. Fuels used were often of lower octane, with many relying on 87 octane instead of the standard 91 or even 100 octane, severely limiting engine performance. Ammunition loads had been drastically reduced to save weight, further impairing their offensive potential. In stark contrast, American Corsair squadrons operating from fleet carriers after December 28, 1944, when they finally received approval for carrier-based operations, enjoyed a staggering array of operational advantages. These included sophisticated radar guidance systems, well-coordinated rescue services, rigorous and consistent aircraft maintenance routines, and the flexibility of rotating pilots back home after completing their combat tours. The overarching statistical record vividly illustrated the overwhelming American dominance in aerial combat. With a total of approximately 21,140 aerial victories and combat losses of only 189 aircraft, the kill ratio reached an astonishing 11.3 to 1. Specifically examining the engagement between the Corsair and the Zero fighter, it becomes clear just how decisive the American aircraft had become. Confirmed Japanese Zero kills by American Corsairs numbered around 1,562, while Corsairs lost to Zero fighters amounted to just over 124. This yielded a kill ratio of approximately 12.6 to 1, a testament to the Corsairs' supremacy. Additionally, pilot survival rates further underscored the disparity. Nearly 64% of American pilots who were shot down survived their encounters, compared to a mere 8% of Japanese pilots who managed to survive their own shoot-downs. The Corsair embodied the philosophy of American industrial and military strategy, namely that problems in warfare could be solved through overwhelming material superiority and technological innovation. Conversely, the Zero fighter represented the Japanese approach of achieving the maximum possible performance with minimal resources, reflecting a resource-constrained mindset. The inevitable clash of these two philosophies in combat demonstrated conclusively that material abundance, when applied effectively, decisively outperformed resourcefulness. Post-war reflections from Jiro Horikoshi, the designer of the Zero, encapsulated this ideological divide. He famously remarked that he had engineered a fighter for a nation limited by scarce resources, an elegant solution born of necessity, whereas the United States engineered aircraft for a nation blessed with unlimited material wealth. He observed that his design was an elegant, efficient solution to poverty, while the American aircraft, such as the Corsair, was an impressive embodiment of abundance. In the brutal reality of war, the principle that abundance wins out proved to be true. During the occupation of Japan following the conflict, Japanese military personnel gained access to detailed intelligence regarding American aircraft production. The numbers revealed a startling reality. American manufacturing efforts were producing planes in staggering quantities. For instance, the Chancevot Corporation alone had manufactured nearly as many Corsair fighters as Mitsubishi had produced Zero fighters. In the vast theater of warfare, it often becomes clear that an endless advantage in equipment and resources can overshadow skill and tradition. The reality is that sheer numbers, even if marginal in quality, can eventually prevail, because quantity has its own intrinsic strength. When armies or air fleets are large enough, they can compensate for deficiencies in individual capability through collective mass. This principle particularly resonates in the context of modern military aviation, where the mass production of a good aircraft can outperform the limited production of an exceptional one. More importantly, the ability to survive and adapt in combat holds significant weight. An aircraft that is more robust or has better survivability is often more valuable in the long run, because dead pilots cannot gather experience or contribute to the war effort. Industrial capacity, the backbone of a nation's military strength, ultimately determines what a country can produce and deploy. A nation that possesses the most advanced, efficient, and abundant factories holds a decisive advantage over its adversaries. Over the course of history, it has become clear that the pace of technological innovation and industrial growth holds greater importance than the initial strategic advantages gained at the outset of a conflict. Once static superiority, an initial technological or tactical lead, becomes meaningless, inevitably turning into a state of inferiority as any advantage erodes over time. These fundamental lessons became the guiding principles for Japan's post-war industrial revival. They formed the foundation for what many refer to as the Japanese economic miracle, a swift and remarkable recovery that transformed Japan from a war-ravaged nation into a leading global economic power. Underlying this transformation is the story of Japanese pilots engaged in aerial combat against the F4U Corsair, which ultimately encapsulates the clash between tradition and modernity. The Mitsubishi Zero, Japan's renowned fighter aircraft during World War II, embodied the pinnacle of lightweight design, emphasizing minimalism to save every possible gram of weight. Countless components were reduced to the bare essentials, aiming for agility and speed, often at the expense of protection and firepower. On the other hand, the American F4U Corsair epitomized industrial abundance, built with power, armor, and firepower in mind, with no compromises. It represented the capabilities of a society capable of producing machinery with confidence in its durability and offensive strength, a stark contrast to the frugal and nimble Zero. When these two philosophies faced each other over the Pacific Ocean, the outcome was essentially predetermined. No matter how skillful or brave the Japanese pilots were, no matter how deeply rooted their military traditions or spiritual resolve, the overwhelming mathematical reality was undeniable. The Corsair had twice the horsepower, meaning more speed and agility, 6 times the firepower, providing unmatched offensive capability, and armor protection that rendered the Zero's light frame almost defenseless. To the Japanese pilots, it was a shocking revelation, a brutal psychological reversal. When their Zero squadrons faced defeat by an aircraft they had underestimated and had believed to be inferior. Prior to the encounter, Japanese aviators entered the war with a firm belief in their superiority, believing their aircraft, their culture, and their tactical doctrines provided an impregnable edge. They envisioned themselves as warriors following traditions steeped in honor, with spirits unbreakable and skills honed through discipline and ritual. But reality struck swiftly and harshly, revealing that their aircraft had become outdated relics, still employing tactics suited for an earlier era, while their enemies possessed industrial and technological capacity that seemed limitless. The F4U Corsair, beyond merely shooting down Zeros, was symbolic of a profound shift. It challenged and ultimately dismantled the worldview that had once upheld Japanese military pride. This aircraft demonstrated decisively that industrial capacity, an expression of a nation's technological and manufacturing strength, was fundamentally more powerful than dedication to tradition or warrior spirit alone. Its destructive capabilities proved that modern technology could defeat honor-bound tactics, and that safeguarding pilots by designing robust aircraft was often more effective than attempting to keep weight to an absolute minimum at the expense of safety. The bitter lessons learned during these encounters over Pacific waters, though costly, proved transformative for Japan. They paved the way for the country's transition from an empire driven by militarism toward a peaceful and prosperous democracy. Japan's post-war evolution was shaped deeply by these realizations, allowing it to rebuild its economy and global stature. Ironically, the very aircraft that Japanese pilots dubbed Whistling Death, a fearsome nickname, became an emblem of Japan's rebirth. The Corsair, through its undeniable industrial superiority, demonstrated the supremacy of a modern, industrial democracy over traditional militaristic ways. This aircraft played a crucial role in Japan's dramatic transformation, helping the nation shift from a war-focused society to one that embraced peace, innovation, and economic strength. By showcasing that technological and industrial excellence could yield victory and security, the Corsair helped lay the foundation for Japan to forge an alliance with the United States, becoming one of America's closest allies and a key partner in global economic development. Pilots who survived encounters with the Corsair carried with them a profound and sobering lesson.